All right, welcome in Powers on Sports podcast. It's Masters Week. We are post NCAA national titles. We got a lot of stuff. We got the NFL draft in a couple of weeks. Got a lot of stuff going on. I got to take the audience before we get started. I got to take the audience behind the curtain a little bit here. Normally, I like to have the podcast out before Thursday or on Thursday. We're recording this late Thursday only because, boy, what a day of breaking news we've had in the sports world. O.J. Simpson, the Masters, Tiger Woods. We got a potential hire at Kentucky. A lot of
Is
stuff
there
happening.
smoke? Is there smoke coming out of the chimney in Lexington, my friend, that there's a Kentucky hire that could be?
Lots of stuff, late breaking news here on the Thursday evening going into Friday. So apologize, but it's for good use that we're delaying this a little bit. That voice you heard is our beloved colleague, Mr. TJ Rives. He was at the Final Four, Buck sideline guy. He's the host of the College Basketball Coast to Coast podcast. He's a former worker with the PGA Tour, so he knows lots of the ins and outs of the what's going on this week in Augusta. So welcome in, Mr. Reeves.
You are far too kind. Have we done this once or twice in the last 3 months? I think we have, but I'm thrilled to be back with you because there's always fresh material. College basketball, the death of O.J. Simpson, which we have to talk about that and how intertwined that is this generation, our generation's JFK assassination.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has opinions, takes. It's been talked about for 30 years. It's going to be talked about for another 30 years or 60 years, that whole situation. And then we have the Masters, as you mentioned. So thank you for having me, and whatever avenues you want to travel, I am at your service, my friend.
Well, I promise we will be quick on a Thursday night here because I know you and I both have had a lot of busy day and lots of stuff going on with flag football and all kind of stuff. So
give the people what they want, though. They want the takes. Let's give them some takes. Go.
There you go. All right. So again, we're going to do a little quick potpourri: Masters, college basketball, NFL, and OJ. Let's start where you were this time a week ago. You were making your way to Arizona. You were out in the Final Four all weekend for both the semifinals and the finals. Give me a quick recap. I know you did some great work on college basketball coast to coast. You did lots of great stuff from Phoenix, Glendale area. Just give me an overview of UConn winning the title in convincing fashion. I was on the other side of the ledger. I thought UConn was going to be given a game at some point, and I actually predicted Purdue was going to beat them Monday night. And I was way off on that.
But honestly, I bought your logic that sooner or later they were going to have to play a tough game, but it turns out it was never. It was not sooner or later. They didn't play a tough game, a game that they were going to lose. And so I appreciate your kind words. It was a lot of fun to be there. That's the 22nd Final Four that I've gotten the privilege to be there, and I've now been to the last 3 back-to-backs. I was a fan in the Metrodome. You'll love this if you haven't heard me talking about it or I haven't shared it with you. I was in the upper deck of the Metrodome 1992 for Mike Krzyzewski, Christian Laettner, Bobby Hurley, Grant Hill to go back-to-back when they beat Michigan, the Fab Five, Chris Webber. Again, those guys were all tiny. They were almost like little miniature figures, like toys. I had a better seat, probably closer back at the hotel than where I was, but I was in the building as a fan that night. Yeah. I covered in the media for SiriusXM the Florida Gator repeat after they had won in Indianapolis in 06, came back and won in 07, Billy Donovan's team with Joakim Noah, Corey Brewer, Al Horford. They repeated with basically the same cast again in 07 in Atlanta over Ohio State. So there I was again on Monday night, State Farm Stadium, Glendale, Arizona, and UConn with a different cast around Klingon and Tristan Newton and Alex Karaban. They had like 4 new contributing players. Didn't matter. They were a freight train, brother. And we're going to talk about this for a while because I don't know the next time somebody else is going back-to-back in this transfer portal era and the one-and-done era. Not easy to do, but Danny Hurley deserves a lot of credit. They are a blue blood. 6 national titles since 1999. Are you kidding me? So give them a ton of credit. They were tremendous, and just take consolation in this. I kept saying it. Houston wasn't going to beat that team had they gotten the crack. Tennessee wasn't going to beat that team. North Carolina, Iowa State, Arizona, it would not have mattered. Whoever was in front of them was more than likely going down, and we saw them finish it off. on Monday.
Give the audience a little perspective of, you told me this over the weekend, and I was, not that I didn't believe you, but I was shocked when you told me this, how many Purdue people were for the weekend.
Unreal. I think they emptied out half of northern Indiana. I'm not exaggerating. They were everywhere in the black and gold, and some of them probably couldn't even get tickets. I exaggerate you not, for the Powers on Sports podcast audience. The third level of State Farm Stadium, the Arizona Cardinal Stadium, was completely Purdue on Saturday and again on Monday night, and that's easily like 20,000 of the seats of the 74,000 in the basketball configuration. I'm not saying UConn didn't have fans there. They probably did. They probably realistically had 15,000 or more.
Yep.
They didn't have anywhere near what Purdue had. Yeah, it was everywhere. Everywhere you were walking, everywhere you were going, Sunday, Monday, in and around Glendale, downtown Phoenix. I did not stay in downtown, but I'm told it was overwhelmingly UConn black and gold. So a great showing. Again, they had not been in the title game since 1969.
Right. They
had been to the Final Four in 1980, 44 years ago, but had not been in a championship game since what? Richard Nixon, right, had been elected as president.
The venerable Lee Rose, a guy we know down here in the Tampa State
1980.
area.
1980, he led Purdue to the Final Four. It's been a while, so you could understand the outpouring and the fans that were there for sure.
One on the court note, and then I'm going to ask you a women's basketball question as well. What a job by Dan Hurley devising the game plan that he decided to utilize, saying, Zach Edey, if you can score 50, God bless you, but we're not going to let anybody else score 20. We're still going to win.
That's right.
The job they did keeping Purdue from they allowed 7 3-point attempts. I don't know if I've ever seen that in a high-level game ever in the three-point era, where a team that was number 1 in the country in three-point shooting in Purdue at almost 40% was held to 7 attempts and 1 make.
They guarded the crap out of them on the perimeter. They were blocking shots, threes on the perimeter. They only had 4 attempts with about 3 minutes left. 3 of those attempts you're talking about came in garbage time at the very end of the game. And they needed in the formula to have like 7 or 8 made threes and didn't get it. Credit UConn and the strategy. And again, I think it's fair to say I can't remember another national title game where somebody in a losing effort had an inconsequential 37 points. You hate to say that, but his 37 points didn't really matter for the outcome of the game. Certainly about the last 6 or 8 that he got, they were conceding a lot of those. Like, okay, you're not going to get a 3. Take the 2. We'll go burn 30 seconds at the other end and do something. Maybe make a 3, maybe make some free throws. They let that go on over and over again with 8 minutes left, 6 minutes left, 5 minutes left. So again, great performance by UConn. Can't say enough about the job they did. And now all the three-peat talk begins. It's going to be very difficult because they basically have to start over completely on the three-peat talk, but they got the first 2 and they got the first repeat since 2007.
And Danny Hurley will get a couple players out of the transfer portal too. Good players that will be looking to move elsewhere. So.
And in the Northeast, in New England, our insider Adam Zagoria from our coverage on college basketball, Coach keeps telling me this. They are a serious player with all the Northeast recruits, New York, New Jersey recruits, and whatever. He will handpick for the next couple of years.
High school kids.
Some of the biggest and baddest one and dones and whomever else he wants, no doubt.
All right, give me a thought on the women's tournament. Obviously, we had South Carolina beat Caitlyn Clark. My thought for you is, how about the women outdrawing the men on TV?
Yeah.
18 million, 18.8 to about 14.5. Just, did you ever think in your lifetime you would ever see that?
No. And Caitlyn Clark is that special of a player. And look, there are other tremendous stories of women's college basketball going all the way back to the UConn programs of Sue Bird and Rebecca Lobo and Diana Taurasi. And even in the 2010s, Brianna Stewart in that group won 4 titles in a row.
Right.
But they weren't getting this kind of attention that Caitlyn Clark brought to it with her electrifying offense, 3-point shooting. So the answer is no. Nobody saw this coming, that they would suddenly start to draw 12 million, 15 million to a tournament game, a Final Four game, and then the second part of that game, the fourth quarter of that game, was peaking at 22 million that were watching the women's game. Transcendent player, let's be realistic. It's not going to continue anywhere close to that level. They'll go back to being like a 4-6 million for the biggest games in the tournament, maybe 8 or 10 million for the final for the women's game. I don't know that it even gets to 8 or 10 million because they don't have her driving it. She's the big key. South Carolina won the national title 2 years earlier, and the championship game got like 3 million people or 4 million people to watch. So credit Dawn Staley and her team. They were the better team. It's kind of the same thing as Zach Edey. They let Caitlyn Clark go crazy with all the points she got. They contained everybody else. They did a great job defensively in the second half of the game. She's a tremendous coach. She's got 3 national titles. She rebuilt her whole team, lost all 5 starters, and they still went undefeated and won the whole thing. Great accomplishment.
All right, last college basketball note. Then we will move to Orenthal, James Simpson, and all the stuff that's going on there. How about a move a couple of weeks ago, a subtle little innocuous move? Rob Lanier, a guy we saw in person not long ago down here in Tampa, did a good job at SMU, gets replaced as SMU goes to the ACC, and the trickle-down effect of the dominoes from Rob Lanier leaving SMU to now potentially Mark Pope, the son of the prodigal son, coming back from BYU to Kentucky to replace one John Calipari.
Yeah, it's amazing. And Lanier had 2 good seasons, but SMU, as you mentioned, wanted to make a change. So Andy Enfield, the Southern Cal coach, the USC coach, decides, you know what, that job looks good to me. SMU moving to the ACC. So he got in the mix and he got the job.
And leaves before the posse gets him at USC.
Yes, he hit the reset button. And so then off a losing season in Fayetteville, Arkansas, Eric Musselman kind of decides the same thing. Maybe the posse's going to be after me. I'm a Western guy anyway because he's coached the Sacramento Kings. He's coached the Nevada Wolfpack to the Sweet 16.
Yep.
So he decides to go to Southern Cal. That opens up Arkansas, and nobody on their bingo card had John Calipari as the Arkansas coach, not even after the opening. Certainly while Musselman's there, you weren't thinking they're going to fire Musselman and hire John Calipari, but even with the opening, you weren't thinking that. So that comes together. That opens Kentucky, and now we've spent the last 2 or 3 days since the Final Four trying to figure out who's the Kentucky coach. And I know as we're talking right now, they've not officially announced it, but it looks like he's the guy. He's a former player on their national title team in '96 with Pitino. He was a role player on that team. He has paid his dues as an assistant and as a head coach. They could do a lot worse.
Yes.
I know their fan base is melting down, but he's a proven head coach, and they could do a lot worse than, as you mentioned, a favored son coming back to run it. And in particular, Jeff Shepard was his teammate on those late 90s teams. If he convinces Jeff Shepard and his son, Reed Shepard, to come back for another year and bank the NIL money and not go to the NBA, that's a victory. And then what else do you have to build around with that? Again, there are a lot of fan bases that go sideways and not understand that's a really good hire you just made. Like how many people were jumping up and down at Alabama about the Nate Oates hire? 5 years ago.
Right.
I mean, come on. So I can answer my own question. Not really anybody.
Yeah.
Who all at Baylor was jumping up and down about Scott Drew?
Right.
And they ended up winning a national title.
How surprised were you that Scott Drew didn't take that after he basically deliberated for 2 days about it?
But they wanted him, but we kept saying Baylor is a tremendous job in a lucrative conference. And the media scrutiny and media come after you stuff doesn't go on in the Waco, Dallas market for Baylor. And he's got tremendous talent coming in, high school recruits, etc. They got a new downtown arena, humongous, successful arena at Waco. There's a lot of reasons to stay, including probably another contract and probably a raise. That's the one thing about these openings. They've gotten raises for people. Calipari apparently took a pay cut off the $9 million. But I mean, again, think about Kentucky. Kentucky stuck with him. One of the most idiotic contracts in modern college sports. We're going to fully guarantee $50 million, $40 million, $30 million as it descends, and you have no buyout whatsoever if you want to leave. So in their world, for Mitch Barnhart, their brass, their people, they're thrilled that he's leaving and they don't have to pay him.
Yes.
Because they were looking to hit the reset button themselves. But what is your thought on the Pope hire, who had been at Utah Grand Valley, moving
Yep.
them into Division One, but he had a winning season every year, went to the
Yep.
postseason every year. He's been at BYU now for 4 or 5 years. Formerly was an assistant there. And I've given my opinions. What's your take, real quick?
One thing I will say is he plays an exciting brand of basketball. They shoot a lot of
Yes.
threes, offensive minded, so it won't be a plotting kind of offense, which I think the fans will like. You saw Kentucky shoot a lot of threes this year. They were really good offensively. They were abysmal on the defensive end. I think that, like I told you for 2 months, I thought the voice had just worn out there with Cal being there.
Right.
I didn't think he was going to end. I didn't think it was going to end the way it ended like that. But I thought that a new voice was needed. I think it'll be good that it's a Kentucky guy. He'll probably get a little bit of a grace period because he's a guy from that '96 team that was, many people think, one of the greatest teams ever.
You know what I'm thinking while you're saying this about grace period?
Yeah.
I mean, all you got to point to is if he doesn't win the SEC and he gets bounced out immediately in the SEC tournament and he gets bounced out immediately in the NCAA tournament, you point to that's last year with John Calipari.
Right.
Didn't do any of those things either.
Right.
So for right now, if he improves in just some of that area with how they do in the regular season, the SEC tournament, and the postseason, then he's a hero for right now. Because remember, for the last few weeks and even back to last season, all the Kentucky fans wanted to change. Well, if you want to change, then you got to live with whatever you can come up with the change. So there you go.
And I think you'll see Pope will be much more committed to seeing Kentucky do well at the college level and not as concerned about every guy being a first-round draft pick and all that stuff. That doesn't benefit the University of Kentucky much at all in the here and now. So I think
they got to get back to winning. They got to get back to dominating, however they can do it, and not worry so much about being an NBA factory, which is what it had become with John Calipari for sure.
Right. All right. Powers on Sports Podcast. That's TJ Rives. I'm Jason in Tampa. If you haven't already hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform, do so. You can find our video here on the Jason Powers Sports channel on YouTube. You can hear our conversation here, as well as all the other previous conversations we've had. And again, lots of stuff going on in the sports world here on this week. Let's go to a topic you and I went back in our younger days. You were on the radio in Tampa talking about this when all this happened. I was a senior in college when all this was happening, 1994, 1995. Orenthal James Simpson, the news of his passing today of cancer. We knew he had cancer, but kind of his we didn't realize that it was this close to the end. Came out of nowhere that he passed away, but he did. We all know, like you mentioned before, we all know where we were when he was when he was exonerated. Whether I'll tell you where I was at before you tell me.
Do it.
In the college student union at UAB in Birmingham on whatever day that was. It was a weekday because I remember
it was October of 1995. Yes.
Yep. Packed to the gills. The student center was packed to the gills because there had been an announcement made earlier in the day that the jury had come to a verdict and it was going to be announced at whatever, I think it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever time it was, Central Time. Packed to the rafters, and as soon as Lance Ito said not guilty, the array of emotions in that student center from both sides of whoever you were supporting in that time was unbelievable.
What a story. Largely divided down racial lines, too.
Yep.
All right, so we could go on for an hour, and maybe we need to do a subsequent podcast because this is the 30th anniversary year of the murders of OJ's ex-wife and Ron Goldman, her friend. So maybe at a later date, we will go over all of that. So 2 or 3 things to get out there in the open. Again, this is this generation's JFK. We are always going to be talking about this and what happened and what we think happened. However, different than JFK, the overwhelming evidence, well, it's kind of the same as JFK. The overwhelming evidence for JFK's assassination points directly and only to one guy, Lee Harvey Oswald. The same thing here in this case. Overwhelming, like Rocky Mountain High pile of evidence that this is the guy that did it. And motive, again, I don't know how many times on Tampa Bay Sports Radio that we went round and round where I would have callers. Back in those days, the internet was basically brand new. There was no social media, but there were people constantly calling in. I remember every day in 1995 on Tampa Bay Sports Radio, we were talking about the trial. We were talking about the testimony in the trial. and how it was going, et cetera, et cetera.
And every night it was
Long,
9 o'clock with Larry King, the
I know,
National Power
long,
recap.
long 9-month trial. Cable news really came into existence with the talking head shows in and around O.J. Simpson. So, other things, and these are the facts. So you have people that point to, well, he was acquitted in the court of law. Yes, he was in the criminal case. And about a year and a half later, he was found liable in the civil case for wrongful death, less burden.
Yeah.
But the jury took almost no time whatsoever to look at the
Right.
evidence and go, yeah, he's the guy. Further fascinating on all of this is he got himself in trouble back in the 2010s for trying to recoup some of his memorabilia, and there was videotape evidence and audio tape evidence of him and the guys around him threatening the memorabilia guy, threatening him with bodily harm, if not death. There's a firearm present, and he ends up going to prison. And some have joked for maybe longer than he would have gone to prison for the murders, for the armed robbery situation in Nevada, and goes to prison for 9 years.
Yes.
Not insignificant. 9 years.
Yes.
He's locked up. So what a story this is.
The guy that had it all. Again,
yeah,
those who don't know O.J. Simpson.
final chapter is sort of written, I guess, with his death. The fall, though, is an amazing fall. You cannot overstate how immensely popular this guy was with football fans, with commercials, with the goofy Naked Gun movies in the late 1980s. He was immensely popular. And then the horrifying details, and I will say it on the Powers on Sports podcast, of what he did to his ex-wife and her friend, which, again, nobody else had a motive to brutally murder those two people. That has never been addressed. That has never been demonstrated by anybody that wants to defend him. I mean, short of, while I don't go down the road to talk about it for another 20 minutes, short of what is your other motive if you're not robbing that house, if you're not some complete sociopath who randomly comes up on two people and decides to kill them, what's the other motive for why you would brutally murder those two people? Unless it's somebody who's an enraged ex who's done this before on the record over and over again of stalking her, abusing her after they're separated / divorced, who kicked her door in, threatening her, screaming at her, trying to harm her, that he snapped and killed him. And I think that's what most people I think almost everybody at this point has had to concede. Even people that were defending him around the criminal trial, there's no one else that did this. And when he showed up, I know I'm monopolizing it. I'll get your thought in a second. But when he showed up in the Bruno Mali shoes in the civil trial, wearing those shoes on those pictures at the Buffalo Bills game, the shoes that he denied ever owning, much less wearing, and those are the shoes that the killer left the crime scene with the blood drops dripping from the left hand on the outside of the shoes that he supposedly never owned. I mean, how much more do you have to have? Rocky Mountain High, Kilimanjaro high pile of evidence. He was the guy. And I guess this, in a way, kind of closes the final chapter with him dying. But any other thoughts from you on that? Because I monopolized that.
A couple things. If you haven't, if those of you, again, if you've never, of a younger age, if you've never seen, if you want to get a pretty good synopsis of the whole O.J. Simpson story from A to Z, the ESPN documentary they did about 7 or 8 parts about 8 or 9 years ago was tremendous. It outlined everything from his growing up, his childhood, his USC days, AC Cowling, the guy who drove the Bronco, his friendship and how all that played into things. Just you mentioned he had police officers and friends of his that helped him cover the abuse. I mean, with the police department back before it even got to escalated. And to me, the biggest thing about this case was the crime itself was horrific, but the racial divide in the country that it created during that trial was unbelievable. And the tension that was, well, if you were on one side of it, made a comment, or on the other side of it, made a comment, the racial overtones were incredible in that time frame in the country.
Well, but and two more things, and then I know you want to move on to the Masters and we'll get out of here. But this is important. Again, he was so beloved in Los Angeles, Heisman Trophy winner for USC, then beloved in Buffalo. Still to this day, the Bills fans, maybe it's waned now because it's 50 years since he
Right.
basically romped for them. He's a football hero for them. Back in a time when the Bills weren't that good, he had a 2,000-yard season. He's arguably the best player in the NFL for a 2 or 3 year run, beloved in Buffalo by the Bills fans. That's what, and then on TV everywhere with
Media,
NBC,
commercials.
commercials. And it was so hard to reconcile. How could this guy have a double life and have been doing this? So that's another important point on this.
Yep.
I'm just one that stayed above the fray of it
Yep.
being about race, because again, he had a white wife, and there's plenty of and we'll just be real here for a second. There was plenty of criticism of O.J. Simpson
Yes.
throughout the 80s and the 90s
Because
that he's living essentially like the suburban rich white athlete life, and not, you know, and not a and not a life of a former black star player. That was out, that was everywhere back in the 90s. But you're right, the documentaries, the ESPN documentary on that one day where the Bronco chase is going on and the Knicks and the Rockets are supposed to play and the New York Rangers Stanley Cup parade's going on and Arnold Palmer's final round at the US Open is going on. That's a phenomenal documentary too. So much has been said, books have been written, etc. Again, it's our generation's Kennedy assassination, but there is some closure now, I guess, with his death. He wasn't going to live forever. The amazing thing is, again, folks, he went to prison for 9 years for armed robbery after the acquittal. And the judge, by the way, sentenced him to exactly, I think, 32 months on each charge. His number, 32. She gave him 32 and 32 and 32. Like, this is for the Goldman and Brown families for what you got away with years earlier. She settled the score.
Yeah, that's the biggest court case in my lifetime for sure. I mean, court case. I mean,
it changed reality TV, daytime TV, talking head shows, recap shows of that trial. You can't say it enough. It's amazing.
And then that's where the famous Johnny Cochran got his. I mean, he became a national figure. Johnny Cochran, Chris Darden.
Yes, Marcia Clark.
I mean, Marcia Clark.
You want a couple of stats? You love my stat nuggets. Number of criminal murder cases Johnny Cochran had been involved with before the O.J. Simpson case. 0. Number of murder one cases Chris Darden had prosecuted as an L.A. County prosecutor. 19. Number of cases he had lost. 0. Wow. So it tells you about what the race card meant, what the bloody glove demonstration meant, the doubt that was created around there because it overcame an awful lot of overwhelming evidence pointing to one guy only. There you go.
And this is last thing in pop culture note, and we'll move on. The first time you ever heard the name Kardashian.
That's
Robert
correct.
Kardashian, the father of Kim and all the Kardashian girls, was O.J. Simpson's attorney and confidant and friend for many, many years. And he was the voice of the O.J. Simpson team for much of that trial and much of that.
Yeah, he was right there. He had been longtime friend and advisor to O.J. and an attorney. And by the way, Kardashian died over 30 years ago, right at 25 years ago, late 90s, right after that trial. And going to his grave said, O.J. Simpson did it. How about that?
All right, let's get one more thing, and we'll get you out. Let's talk a little Masters. Obviously, it's the Masters week. We are recording this post round one.
Correct.
The round one is not finished. It's delayed.
Most of round one completed, but they had the weather delay and then darkness set in. So you're gonna know more as the podcast is released about the finish of round one and the start of round two. Good disclaimer. Yes.
Give me a quick thought. I know you probably have watched a good bit of it today, and just your thought on Tiger and DeChambeau and any surprises from round one from you.
Well, Bryson DeChambeau tore it up on day one. What course was he playing? Came out of the chute, birdie on 1, 2, and 3, and then finished strong down the stretch with 3 more birdies. Does that hold up? We shall see. He's not going to play until late Friday afternoon. The wind is supposed to be vicious on Friday as you're hearing this. So will the scores come down? You've got Scotty Scheffler, who was the champion 2 years ago, lurking near the top. And it's interesting because you've got a mix of some other guys, some big names that are also lurking outside of there. Patrick Reed, a former champion. The live golfers, it's interesting with the live
Yeah.
golfers. DeChambeau at the top, Reed lurking as a former champ, John Rounds, the defending champ. Phil
Joaquin
Mickelson, yep,
Neiman.
Neiman is on that leaderboard. Phil Mickelson had a great Sunday a year ago and
Yeah.
finished top 5. He threw away his round on the last 3 holes
Right.
on Thursday night. How will he do? So I'm fascinated. Does Tiger Woods, real quick, your take, does Tiger Woods make the cut? Does he make it through these 2 rounds? He's got to play, as it stands, 23 holes
Yep.
on Friday and early Friday for his
Yep.
bad back and his leg. What do you think?
I think he will figure out a way. I know he may suffer tomorrow, and it may be the Saturday that he really struggles, but I think he'll figure out a way tomorrow to do enough to make the cut. He played pretty well today, actually. If you really look,
It's
watched him,
amazing.
his first hole, he striked 3 beautiful shots, and he was 1 under after
That's
1
correct.
hole. And he scrambled pretty good today on a couple up and downs. He looked pretty good with his swing.
And look,
but can he walk 23 holes tomorrow?
That's right. And he moves the needle, and he won this thing in 09 when many thought it was over with the back injury. And now he's got the shattered leg rebuilt. It's almost like he's the $6 million man, Lee Majors. Look it up, kids. Google it. It was a dramatic series on ABC. So Tiger's been rebuilt. I don't know that he can hang in for the weekend. We shall see. But this course, this drama never disappoints. Well, it's just like the NCAA tournament. We keep saying that. It never fails on delivering on excitement, back 9 Sunday, etc. Rory McIlroy has not won a major of any kind in 10 years, has never won the Masters, and he didn't have a great round on Thursday. Is he going to make something happen? So
that was my pick. I'll be transparent. That was my pick. Was Rory. He was my pick going in pre-Thursday. So
and maybe he puts something together, but that
2 under, he was okay. 2 under.
It's put him in his place over and over again.
Yep.
We shall see. And the one thing I would just convey to your audience, having been there for practice rounds, having covered it, having talked about it for years and years and years on the radio, on podcast, etc., is the amount of elevation, undulation, up and down on the front 9. You can't get over it. Now, I know they show a ton of the front 9 now on the internet and on all the coverage. They used to not show you the front 9 in the 90s and the 2000s. But you can't believe 300-foot elevation change going up a hill on a par 5 and then coming back down the hill on that front 9. You see it some, you can sort of tell, but until you've been there and walked it, it's a difficult walk to walk that 18, much less play at the highest level. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying it is tough. It is the truth on having to battle that, the elements. It's a tremendous field. And we know all the holes coming down the stretch. You know Amen Corner and the par 5s, 13, 15. You know the famous 16th hole where Jack Nicklaus very nearly made the hole-in-one and clinched things in 86, where Tiger Woods made that great chip in on that 16th hole, the par 3, 2005, in his win. I mean, time and again, you know those holes, 17, 18 to finish. It's going to be fun to watch all of this unfold. For sure, for this weekend.
All right, for a guy that I know, again, you've spent your whole career in the media world and done a lot of stuff with a lot of cool events. And again, TJ covered the PGA Tour for multiple years. He was there he was in the fairways interviewing guys, right there walking the fairways with these guys and post round interviews and all that. He's done it all. Give me a thought on Vern Lundquist. 40 years, the 2 iconic calls.
Oh my gosh, I know.
Much less what he's done in other sports with the kick 6 and the different things he's been involved
Christian
with.
Laettner's shot.
Yes.
You go your whole career wanting to have a moment that everybody will talk about and remember. Vern Lundquist got like 6 of them because you start talking about the Christian Laettner shot. You 92. Talk about Jack 92, Duke, Kentucky, regional final. You talk about Jack Nicklaus putter in the air on 17 where he 86. Says, maybe, yes, sir. That it goes in. You talk about the kick 6 in the Alabama game. You talk about the Tiger chip in on 16 as well. Those are all Vern Lundquist. So
one guy
again, just an amazing stretch of moments for him throughout a great career. And he's a fantastic guy. He's a phenomenal guy. So he's saying goodbye to the Masters, said goodbye to the SEC coverage on CBS and his CBS football and basketball roles about 5 years ago, 5, 6 years ago. But yeah, it won't be
Son
the
of a
same.
preacher who left theology school
How about
back in
that?
the day because he
He
didn't.
was the longtime radio voice for about 7 or 8 years of the Dallas Cowboys before
Yes,
CBS TV hired him.
yes.
Amazing run, but you're right. And I'm the son of a preacher, as you know, so it only makes me feel good to hear
That's
that
why.
about
Yeah,
Vern Lundquist.
yeah,
But it's not going to be the same to not have him on that 16th tower. What's interesting is Jim Nance was in that 16th tower
yeah,
for the Jack Nicklaus 86 run. His
yeah,
famous line, "The bear is out of hibernation," when he
yeah.
tapped that ball in. And then again, it's Vern on 17 with the putt, where Jack's holding up that black mallet putter that they sold literally about 1 million of them in the days after that Masters. Vern Lundquist synonymous with this event, and Nance is still in the 18th tower 30 plus years later, replacing Pat Summerall, and will continue on doing that. You know those voices, you know those holes. That's why this tournament's so special. So good on you that you're remembering Vern Lundquist.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, TJ Reeves, 2 weeks to the Bucks draft. I know you're going to be probably doing something with the Bucks
Yep.
draft night. Give me a quick thought on just are all the
Well,
quarterbacks? You think all the quarterbacks are going like everybody says they are?
probably. And if you're the Buccaneers, your needs are like interior offensive line, edge rusher.
Right.
Can't have enough good defensive backs. I think that's the route they're probably going to be looking. Again, they don't share this information with me. I don't have coffee and donuts with Jason Light, the Bucks GM, but I look forward to seeing what they're going to do because Jason Light has repeatedly restocked this team with draft picks. We don't have time to go over all of it, but names like Yaya Diaby and Cade Otton and Rashad White recently, and Antoine Winfield and Tristan Wirfs before. Get excited, Buccaneer fans, about reloading this team in the first or second round if you're the Buccaneers. I'm anxious to see. If it's my druthers, I'm going interior offensive line, edge rusher as like priorities, but maybe they go defensive back. We'll see. We'll find out soon enough. They're picking much later in the first round because they've been winning, so we'll see which way they head.
All right, TJ Reeves, thanks for the time. Appreciate the great insight. Appreciate you letting me be involved with the college basketball coast to coast
You deserved it.
podcast, which you did a great
You
job.
deserved it. You did a great job on all the live coverage and with the college basketball coast to coast podcast. We had a blast in March. It'll be back around before we know it for the basketball season. Keep up the great work. Anytime you need me, you put the bat signal up. I'm there for you.
Where's the Final Four next year?
Final Four in San Antonio, the Alamo City next year.
All right. Maybe I'll try to make that trip with you.
Could be there. You could be there 12 months from now. Let's see what happens, my friend. Be well.
All right. Powers on Sports Podcast. Appreciate you finding us. Subscribe, rate, and review. Find us on X at JPO Sports. You can find TJ Reeves at Buck Sideline Guy as well. He does great work, boxing podcast. Now he's got a lot of boxing stuff going on through the summer. He'll be involved with the Buccaneer draft coverage. And before you know it, it'll be college football in the NFL season once again. And we will be all over it here on the Powers on Sports Podcast. Appreciate you finding us. Have a great week. Hope your Masters picks come to fruition. I got a nice 90-1 shot on Sergio Garcia for $10. So let's go, Sergio. So we'll see you next time, Powers on Sports Podcast.